Anesthesia is much more different from adult anesthesia. So you should be able to uh, be well versed with what is needed for pediatric anesthesia. First, thoroughly you should be thorough about the pediatric anatomy. Airway anatomy of pediatric is totally different from adult anatomy. So then only you can be a winner in the pediatric anesthesia. Now I introduce Dr. Asam. He is a consultant anesthesiologist and critical care specialist from Bhagavan Mahavir Jain Hospital. His special interest will be in regional anesthesia, ultrasound guided nerve blocks, pediatric anesthesia, critical care and obstetric anesthesia. And he has recently awarded 9th best photographer in India, and his awards and achievements were author of a book of Dr. Assam's Notes in Anesthesiology in e-publication, and he has written a chapter in Principles of Critical Care and in Obstetrics, in Mechanic Ventilation in Critically Ill Patient, in Obstetric Patient, and Anesthetic Management of Pre-Eclampsia and Eclampsia. He has issued an advisory on COVID-19 and anesthesia and published in August 2020 in the issue of JOACP, and he also has issued a book on pre-oxygenation and anesthesia and a detailed review. Now I call upon Dr. Asam to deliver lecture on pediatric anesthesia.
Thank you, respected Chair. Thank you so much. Good morning. Good morning. Good morning. I think Sir has made sure that you're up. Fantastic lecture. Thank you, Meenakshi Sundaram Sir. As Gurudat Sir says and Dr. Meenakshi Sundaram Sir says, not for a minute I regret of being an anesthesiologist, for the reasons very simple, because we are the best airway managers. We use the IV fluids, probably the most highest volume of IV fluid users, the best possible IV lines, the IV access, nobody can beat us. The way we give spinals, I can challenge, nobody can do better than us. The way we do epidurals, we are the best. So I don't think for a minute you should ever bob down. The initial 3 months will be like, anesthesia will be like evaporating everywhere for you guys, but have some patience, stick along, I'm sure you go a long way. Now, say you're on a call and you get to see this baby here, and you have this baby who has come to you. Mother has noticed difficulty in breathing from past 3 months. There is a nasal regurgitation. Then we have, baby had a recurrent respiratory tract infection. This is a real case. This baby was admitted in the ICU for about 6 months. Baby was then about 1 year, 7 months. About 8 to 9 months, baby had to suffer from respiratory tract infection on and on. Multiple episodes of cough and conductive. Baby also has a hearing loss, absolutely zero hearing loss. What you see here is a conducting, some way of, to make sure the baby is getting heard, whatever we are saying. And this baby is a Tetracolin syndrome, and baby also has OSA with CPAP. Now you're on call, your senior tells you, Macha, go and see this case because I'm busy. You get to see this. So here is where your neurons should kick in, and they should think about like what are the possibility causes that can come to your mind, how I'm going to manage the airway, how is the physiology going to behave when I give a drug in this baby, and a lot of others, cardiac, respiratory system changes that comes into this baby, how you're going to manage. So this is why I'm here. So this baby was posted for mandibular distraction for OSA surgery. With this, I would like to thank Edward Johnson sir. Thank you sir for giving me an opportunity. I think this generation is very lucky to have teachers like Edward Johnson. We have Pankaj Kundra sir. We have the great Dr. Gurudat sir. We never had this opportunity on the social media or whatever, where sir teaches so much on social media and with other respected teachers here. So very lucky, and thank you to be thanks for inviting me sir, and mutual learning is always the best way. I get greetings from Jain Hospital. This is our new building. Now we run a cleft leadership center. Now this is the first in the country, first in Asia and the 5th in the world. We do ASA 3 and ASA 4 cleft flips and cleft palates from smile cases. Yes, a small disclosure, all the patient's picture. I'm talking about the patient's picture have taken prior approval from the parents. However, these pictures I cannot circulate. A humble request is avoid taking pictures of these babies. Now, once you get into this, once you start seeing this baby, what should come to your mind is, this baby belongs to what category of the age? That is number one. And what is small for gestation age and what is large for gestation age? Let's see. We call newborn in the first 24 hours, then we have neonates up to 28 days, then we have infants 12 months, toddlers, preschool, school and adolescents. Now sometimes these babies get classified based on the weight. We call it as very low birth weight, we call it as very low birth weight and extremely low if it is less than 1000 grams. Now there's one thing that we also need to really worry is, irrespective of the age what the baby has, you've got to see whether the baby is preterm. The reasons is why actually I'm worried about this I'm going to tell you in the next slide, but however, if it is moderate between 32 to 37 weeks preterm, it is 28 to 32 weeks, it is very preterm and extremely preterm less than 28 weeks. Now, why are we worried about this? Yes, we do all this, we do see all these complications, but more importantly, when it comes to anesthetic implications of prematurity, the first thing that we need to worry is about the apnea of prematurity. Believe me, this one thing is very, very dangerous. You can kill a baby if you're not very careful with the apnea of prematurity. Obviously, these patients have some shunts with them. They have hypoglycemia, not to forget, they are hypothermias, and definitely their parasympathetic system is more active than the sympathetic system, so they have bradycardia, and not to forget metabolic acidosis. These are the red things that I'm very much worried about when I'm dealing with a premature baby. Now we have all heard, and it is widely taught, that the neonates and infants are obligatory nasal breathers, meaning they breathe only through nose, especially in the first few months of life. Now, why are they nasal breathers? For a couple of reasons. One is they breathe and feed at the same time, that is one. And second, because the nostrils are very small, and they produce some amount of resistance, and they create something like CPAP to prevent the airway getting collapsed. So this is other reasons. What should we be careful about is avoid any kind of obstructions. No, don't put in a lot of tubes in there and obstruct the nostrils. And if there are any nasal crusts and clots, to be sucked out to make sure that the airway is patent. Now this wonderful article came in saying that infants are not obligate nasal breather anymore, right? Now what they did is, they did a study. Whenever the baby had obstruction, they saw whether the baby is going to only breathe from the nose or is it going to start off from the mouth. So at the mean end of 7.8 seconds, they found out the soft palate started raising up and the baby initiated mouth breathing. So studies have shown that they can switch to mouth breathing if the nasal passage is obstructed. Now quickly, let's go to anatomical differences. As we all know that the head is large, the occiput is very prominent, they are more challenging with the patient, its positioning. The large tongue, in relation to the mouth, there is increased risk of obstruction. We know the narrowest point in the airway, that is subglottic in infants versus glottis in the adults. Now, the position of the larynx is one thing that we need to worry about. It is C3 and C4 in infants, whereas C4 and C5 in adults. The airway is more compliant, they're more prone for collapse, and age-appropriate equipment to be used. Now, because of the positioning, I would like to keep a baby in this way, right? I need to keep a small sandbag there, and though in this baby I have already intubated, this is for cleft palate, but however, because of the large head and there's a prominent occiput, I would like to place the baby in this position. And also I would like to get as much as possible, get the tragus in line with the sternum. Fine. Now, because of the large head, you should also worry about hypothermia. So they keep on losing excessive heat from the body. Now, these are the babies that, the left baby, there was some syndrome, we could not do a genetic mapping, but on the right, this baby is pure in sequence, you get to see these babies in your thing. As Gurudat sir has already mentioned, anatomical face mark is not good because two things, one has cushioning and one has high dead space, may not fit to the contour of the baby's face. So the best mask is the Rendell-Baker mask, which sir has already mentioned. In older children, we can use scented mask or perfumed masks are available. In this baby, we have a baby with a huge tongue, and all the pediatric babies are considered, patients are considered as difficult airways. They have large tongue in relation to the oral cavity, which is very difficult to visualize the vocal cords. Now, tongue, what if they have a large tongue? So the tongue tends to fall back, increasing the risk of airway obstruction. Now, this is epiglottis and narrow and tubular. The epiglottis is proportionally smaller but elongated, that you need to keep in mind. It is narrow and tubular. It is omega shaped. It is angled over the larynx. Now, what it means is it sometimes creates a challenge to visualize the vocal cords. So it is angled in such a way, and not to forget the cartilages are immature and increased compliance it can produce it. That's why it making it more floppy and more mobile. This is the anterior and higher larynx, what I was mentioning. In preterm neonates, it is at C2 and C3. So you got to be very careful with intubations. In preterm, C3 and C4 in terms, and so on and so forth, as it keeps coming down as the age increases. Gurudat sir has already told about the blades. Now, there was a study done, anytime Miller blade gives you better visibility than Macintosh, there is no doubt about that. But if you see in Miller's blade, you got to lift the epiglottis also. But where in Macintosh, you need to place the blade at the vallicula. What is the advantages of this is, if you are using a Miller's blade, because the baby's parasympathetic is more developed than sympathetic, the chance of bradycardia is very high. You've got to be a little careful. They can get into bradycardia, and incidence of bradycardia is quite high. Now, sometimes we need, like, how do we intubate these babies when we have to really have challenges in front of us? So we have something called as external laryngeal maneuver. What I'm going to do is, now if you see this baby has a prominent maxilla, he has a bilateral cleft. So I go to the extreme left of the thing, then I pass my endotracheal tube here. What I'm going to do is, I'm putting my external laryngeal, I'm doing an external laryngeal maneuver here with my little finger. I'm asking my assistant, I move to the left, and this is the way to do it. Probably this picture will tell you the most. When do we say modified external laryngeal maneuver? You take your assistant hand and show where to give a pressure. That's called as external laryngeal maneuver. Now, sometimes we need to do this assisted intubations where I always sit and intubate the babies, number one. Second, it is for your comfort, whatever your comfort is. Second, I try to create a view for my postgraduate student so that she can put in a endotracheal tube for an assisted intubation. We always thought that the pediatric and adult larynx, the adult larynx was cylindrical in shape, whereas the pediatric is in funnel. But then the studies have shown that adult larynx exhibit a degree of funnel shape as well. Only the thing is, in pediatrics, the funnel is much more steeper. So now, based on this, now they have come up with modern equipment. And if you see this graph here, the red line is the adult and the blue line is the pediatric. So both are slightly slanted, whereas the pediatric blue line is much more slanted. Now this brings us to the discussion of the cuffed and microcuff tubes. Now the material that we use, as sir had shown the tube picture, the material that has been used in microcuff tube is polyurethane cuff. If you see there, the topmost there on the picture, the cuff is very close to the bevel, and there is no Murphy's eye there. That is number one. So the design is made in such a way that the microcuff has a very, the compliance is much lower in these patients. If you take the functional difference here, the sealing mechanism creates very minimal pressure, and the risk of pressure injury with the microcuff is much more less and does not cause much damage to the mucosal, does not cause mucosal damage. And then less risk due to the cuff placement away from the tripod. So it creates much more effective seal. If you see this here in this two pictures, we have a cuff pressure monitor. If you see the shape of this is more of rectangle and this more of oval shape, where it creates impinging on the tracheal mucosa and cut off the blood supply at times. Coming to the tracheal length, this is also very important difference because pediatric has 5 centimeters, adult length is about 12 to 14 centimeters, and the angulation also is 25 and 45, 55, 55 in pediatrics. So this is why is this important? It's very simple, because there is very high risk of endotracheal tube. Endobronchial intubation is very high. Sometimes if you move the head, there could be accidental extubation. It is always important to recheck the endotracheal tube positioning or what the change of the positioning or whenever you move the head, Right. So now what is the importance of this bifurcation? So endotracheal tube may enter either right or left bronchus. That is one thing that you need to keep in mind. Always auscultate, look for the chest expansion, and always have a pulse oximeter to see that. Now one more thing I forgot to tell, wherever you see this star, it's a take-home message and it's important from exam point of view. Now if you see summarize the differences in one go is, one is they are more, the pediatric airway have more likely to, they are more immature and likely to collapse very easily, number one. They are more free, what you call the endotracheal tube displacement is very commonly seen. Endobronchial intubations are very high again in this group of patients. They are more easily obstruct an airway and there is extubation risk. A small movement can the tube coming out is very, very common. So now let's go to the respiratory system here. As we know that the number of alveoli 300 versus 100, what is its importance is very simple. The importance is the lower alveolar surface area in the neonates and infants, they reduces gas exchange and they are very prone for hypoxemia. And higher the oxygen consumption in neonates, that is 6 ml versus 3 ml. So that leads to faster desaturation during apnea, and pre-oxygenation is crucial for intubation. There is something called dysnaptic growth. Why this happens is because the term dysnaptic growth refers to the disproportionately large absolute growth of the lung parenchyma relative to the growth of the conducting airways. Fine. Now we also understand we have two types of fibers, type 1 and type 2. The type 1 is slow, the twitch, fatigue resistant fibers, and type 2 are fast twitch, fatigue prone fibers. So in neonates, we have highest number of type 2 fibers and we have less type 1 fibers in neonates, about 25%, and it reduces to 10% in preterms. So what is this importance? Now with this we need to talk about the tidal volume and the absolute tidal volume. Tidal volume is the volume of air exhaled or inhaled or exhaled in a single breath during the normal inspiration without any force applied. So the absolute tidal volume that is here, it refers to the actual volume of air in milliliters that is moved in and out of the lung. So these are the various, this table tells you the various tidal volumes and the absolute tidal volume. Now what is its importance? Why are we talking about so much? So the pediatric patients have a much smaller absolute tidal volume, so compared to adults. So neonates and infants rely only on the respiratory rate and increasing the tidal volume because their lung cannot expand much. That is the other thing that you need to take home. Always set the tidal volume according to the body weight, not otherwise. Now in few conditions you need to have a lung protective strategies and to avoid the ventilatory induced injuries like barotrauma or volume trauma. And not to forget, the pediatric patients have a lower absolute tidal volume, the metabolic rate demand being very higher. They cannot compensate. The only way to compensate is by the increasing in the heart rate, the respiratory rate. Now, the importance of this is very simple. The risk of barotrauma is very high if you overset the tidal volume, or if you underset, there is a problem of CO2 retention and acidosis. And in some patients, we need to reduce the tidal volume to about 4 to 6 ml because they have diaphragmatic hernia. In conditions with ARDS and diaphragmatic hernia. Now, we also want to monitor them continuously, like end-tidal carbon dioxide, we have peak inspiratory pressures, we have flutter pressures. These are all common findings that you see it on the ventilator screen. So to avoid the increase in the peak pressures. Yes, always use tubings that have with low, which does not cause much of resistance. So to summarize, there is again tidal volume, we set about 6 to 8 ml per kg. Absolute tidal volume should always be weight index, not fixed values. The risk of injuries are very, very common because of volume trauma. If you have an incorrect tidal volume, there will be a dead space. You got to be careful. You need to monitor the end-tidal carbon dioxide, PIP, and compliance. And definitely disease specific, you have to adjust the tidal volumes. Now, as I told you, the oxygen consumption is very high, that is 6.8 ml versus 3 ml. What is functional residual capacity? The volume of air remaining in the lung after normal expiration is functional residual capacity. That is the reserve that it gives you when you are intubating. And if that is very small in pediatric age group, and that can cause faster desaturation. Closing capacity is almost more than the FRC actually, because again these baby, the volume at which the small airway begins to close is very, very common in pediatric age group. They have immature respiratory control, they are more prone for apnea, especially neonates and infants. If you talk about the FRC, in neonates it's about 27 to 30 mils, in infants it is about 30 to 35 mils, and it increases as the age increases. So we know now that low FRC, faster desaturation during apnea, so pre-oxygenation is very critical to increase the safe apnea time. You know, you give muscle relaxant, right? The time where the patient stop breathing, that's called as a safe apnea time. So use PEEP as much as possible to prevent atelectasis and maintain the FRC in these patients. So we have discussed this, I'll skip. So this is what in brief. Again, FRC is very low in these patients, closing capacity is very high, prone for atelectasis and so on. Now, the other important thing that we need to keep in mind is the alveolar ventilation. Babies cannot just increase alveolar ventilation, it depends upon the respiratory rate. Now, the tidal volume is not changed in this group. They have to maintain twice the alveolar ventilation. This can be done only by one thing, by increasing the respiratory rate. If you reduce the respiratory rate, the alveolar ventilation reduces. Now, for example, think you're giving an opiate. I'm not saying you should not give an opiate. If you give an opiate, it reduces the respiratory rate. If you reduce the respiratory rate, alveolar ventilation decreases, and that leads to hypercarbia and hypoxia, which needs to be monitored. Now, because of the low FRC and higher alveolar ventilation, the rapid induction and inhalation is very, it's very fast. But if you're using halothane, you've got to be careful. That can cause severe myocardial depression. Now, again, the lung compliance is low in pediatric because of a couple of reasons: immature lung tissue, immature surfactant, and high airway resistance. Again, the chest wall compliance also is very high because the soft cartilaginous, not fully developed, the more flexible. Whenever there is a negative pressure, what happens is it collapses inward instead of outward expansion. That is what you need to keep in mind. So these are the few important things I've already said. Neonates and infants have low compliance, so it needs a higher inspiratory pressures, but tidal volumes should be low. That is why we use a pressure control ventilation to prevent barotrauma or volume trauma. And always use PEEP, at least physiological PEEP, positive end expiratory pressure. So we need to have at least 5 centimeters, 3 to 5 centimeters physiological PEEP. What is physiological PEEP? It is at that PEEP where there are no much changes in the hemodynamics. They have higher metabolic demand, and the carbon dioxide production is about 6 as compared to 3 in adults. Coming to cardiovascular system, their heart rate is very high, number 1. The stroke volume is fixed, number 2, because the myocardial compliance and their less contractile reserves. Cardiac output is heart rate dependent because heart rate into fixed stroke volume. You cannot increase the stroke volume. How you cannot increase alveolar ventilation in respiratory issues. So the myocardium, the neonatal myocardium has a large supply of myocardium, nuclei and endoplasmic reticulum, which supports the cell growth and protein synthesis. But these are non-contractile tissues which render the myocardium not to contract well. So this is few things that you need to keep in mind. Now, coming to inhalation agents, this is a very important slide. Now, volatile anesthetic agents like sevoflurane, isoflurane, and halothane, they have profound vasodilatation and blood pressure drops in neonates, and they use lower MAC. I was discussing with Gurudat sir yesterday, in fact, how the mechanism and how the inhalation agent causes myocardial depression. So the pediatric patients are more susceptible because the sarcoplasmic reticulum stores are less in calcium. So they rely morely from the extracellular calcium, which are blocked by the inhalation agents. So you got to be careful, and myocardial depressant effects are very, very high in this group of patients. What heart rate you got to be careful? 170 in neonates, 160 in infants. No matter what, the best way to identify a hypotension in pediatric babies are have a precordial step. Muffled heart sound is the first indirect sign of hypotension, along with the weak pulse, poor perfusions, jugular venous distension if visible because they have a short neck, and dyspnea and distress. These are the few signs to say that, because we cannot go how we go in adults, because in adults when heart rate goes high, when BP is low, heart rate goes high, but that's not the same true in the pediatric age group. no matter what, never let the BP go, heart rate go beyond 180 beats per minute, because at this point of time, your cardiac output is not sustained and it is not reliable. Temperature regulation. This is another very important question and very important from a practical point of view. Why are the babies hypothermic? High surface area to body surface area, and they have less thin skin, less subcutaneous fat, and they have immature thermoregulation. The hypothalamic temperature regulations are not fully developed, and that's why poor response to stress. Now, how they compensate the heat? By non-shivering thermogenesis. Non-shivering thermogenesis is the primary mechanism by which a neonate and infant generate heat, because they lack shivering. Now, why they lack shivering is very simple. They lack muscle mass. They rely on brown fat metabolism, and they have less skeletal muscle. These are the few reasons that. But to proper understanding of hypothermia, you need to understand the critical temperature and the neutral temperature, which I'm not going to go into details because of time constraints. Now, other reason is, this is another very clinical question, practical question asked in the exams. Why the brown fat is brown? It is because of the mitochondrial density is very high. They contain a large number of mitochondria in brown fat, and they have iron-rich cytochromes in mitochondria. Again, high-rich content in mitochondrial cytochromes. They are highly vascularized, which contribute for the brown fat. And a word about the role of mitochondria and UCPI. UCPI is nothing but uncoupling protein 1. So what happens is the UCP1, that is uncoupling protein 1 in mitochondria, allows protein leak. The proton leak. This proton leak generates heat instead of ATP. That is how the heat is getting produced. So the most commonest way of the loss of hypothermia is radiation energy. Coming to the kidney changes, again the number of nephrons are less. Preterm neonates are very prone for long-term CKD and hypertension if not taken care with proper fluid management. And the GFR is almost half of the adult, so prolonged drug elimination, risk of fluid and electrolyte imbalances. They are very prone for metabolic acidosis, hyperkalemia and dehydration. Neonates are highly sensitive to hypertension and ischemia, which we need to keep in mind. Now, we all understand that the liver, there is phase 1 and phase 2 metabolism. Which one gets affected in the pediatrics? Both phase 1 and phase 2, but more of phase 1 gets slightly impaired. So what if they get affected? How is it going to affect us as anesthesiologists? One, it's in preterm, it prolonged drugs half-life and accumulation half-life. In term neonates, you should have careful dosing adjustments are needed, and make sure you avoid NSAIDs in less than 2 years of age. Coming to the central nervous system changes, they have immature myelination, increased brain water content, immature blood-brain barriers. They have high MAC, so minimum alveolar concentration for inhalation agents, and because of the immature blood-brain barrier. Now, these are the reasons. Their anesthetic concerns. If you have immature myelination, they are very sensitive to anesthetics, delayed recovery. This is more commonly seen when there is a preterm baby. That is one thing you need to keep in mind. Adjust all water-soluble drugs and be careful with the fluid management, because they get into fluid overload very fast. So these are the few indications. Now, MAC. The MAC, as I told you, the MAC of sevoflurane increases. In adults, it is about 1.8 to 2, but in children and neonates, the MAC, which requirement for MAC is much higher. That is 3.2 to 3.5, or even much higher than that. We also understand the spinal cord termination both in lower border of L3 in neonates, L2, L3 in 1 year, whereas in adults it is about L1 and L2. Right? The dural sac ends at S2 and S3 in neonates. So what is its anesthetic implication? Be careful because of higher CSF volume, drug distribution, shorter duration for spinal anesthesia as compared to adults, increased spread of spinal anesthesia due to lower myelination, high block levels with the same dose as seen. What is the dose that is required to, if at all you are using spinal anesthesia? Less than 5 kg, about 0.1 ml per kg. 6 to 15 ml, 6 to 15 kgs you use about 0.08, and more than 16 you use about 0.6 ml per kg. Now, to summarize and takeaways is to put whatever we have discussed, all this: large head, prominent occiput, large tongue, floppy epiglottis, difficulty is very difficult, airway obstruction is very high, number one. high oxygen consumption. We know that 6 ml or 6 mils versus 3 mils in adults. So plus to add on that, low FRC. So they are prone for rapid desaturation. Don't keep taking your sweet time for intubation. Cardiac output is dependent on heart rate and avoid bradycardia. The first thing of cardiac arrest in pediatric age group is hypoxia, the first cause. The second cause is hypoxia, the third cause is hypoxia. If your hypoxia is corrected, your bradycardia can be avoided. There is large surface area, so heat loss is very high. They are very prone for hypothermia. Make sure you take adequate care. There are immature kidneys and you maintain the temperature anywhere between, if it is a preterm 28 degrees, if it is a term about more than 26 degrees, so OT temperature can be maintained. Immature kidneys, so avoid NSAIDs in the first 2 years of life. Altered drug metabolism can be there. So immature blood-brain barriers, increased MAC will be seen, and they're very sensitive to local anesthetics. So the last, as your budding anesthesiologist, as you're the future for our country, knowledge, as Meenakshi Sundaram said, don't run behind money or power, but however, knowledge is the key to success. You will gain respect, power and position through knowledge. Take it from me, this is proved beyond, and you're seeing the live examples who have come here as faculties. Knowledge is a treasure that cannot be stolen. That is one thing again you need to think. And knowledge is in you, will guide you through any obstacle that you come across. Now the thing why I'm saying, whenever there is a difficult case, believe me, if you're well read, the neurons gets connected automatically and it will come out with a solution. And I'm telling you this of a practical knowledge. So thank you so much for your kind attention. And if you have any doubts, I'm happy to clear them. Thank you so much once again.
Thank you, Dr. Asam, for your excellent lecture. Actually, pediatric anesthesia is an art. It's a very good science. Actually, Dr. Asam has dealt it very nicely. What is important in pediatric anesthesia? Very much, I want to stress more on the one point. Pediatric patients are always prone for hypoxia very easily. So you should be very careful in giving anesthesia. They are very prone for hypoxia. That is one thing. And another 2 more points I want to add to your very practical points. Whenever you are selecting a endotracheal tube of size, you should select one size lesser than the required size, because in adult the narrowest part is rhima claudidis. The narrowest part of the trachea is rhima. So once you pass the rhima claudidis, the tube will go in very easily. But in pediatric age group, the narrowest part is in the cricoid level. So even if you are able to pass the tube in the vocal cord, so they may get stuck in the cricoid level. So that point I want to say. So one tube, one size lesser than the required size you should select. That is one thing. Another thing is, in infants, the vocal cord is always surrounded by the loose areolar tissue. So whenever, even after the smooth intubation, the baby is likely to develop laryngeal edema after extubation. So you should always give some dose of steroids in your post-anesthesia period. That will prevent the laryngeal edema caused by your intubation. So that's 2 points I want to add up. This is a practical tip for the anesthetist. Otherwise, very good lecture, sir.
Thank you. In fact, the Tetcher-Collins syndrome, that picture that I showed you, so what happened was, because of time constraints, I could not put the whole picture. I presented this in many conferences. We were forced to take that baby because they felt, because of the hypoxia, the baby was not developing. So they wanted to do a mandibular distraction to relieve the OSA. So when we took up the baby for surgery, baby had multiple respiratory tract infection. Obviously babies with multiple recurrent respiratory tract infection can develop some amount of fibrosis and stiff lung. So as soon as I intubated this baby, his peak airway pressures were 26. And it was a crowd-funded patient. Mother and father were software techies. They were crowd-funded, and it was adopted baby. So every day, every report was going. The plan was to do a mandibular distraction on both the sides, put the baby on ventilator for 7 days, every day turn about 3 mm distraction of the mandible. That was a plan. So one side was over, we moved the head on the other side, and suddenly the pressures went to 45 peak inspiratory pressures. So, and a little bit of hypoxia, about SpO2s were about 90. I realized at that point of time that okay, fine, now we have something, gone wrong. Got an ultrasound, there was a pneumothorax where I have collected all the x-rays, everything. I could not show it because of time. So I put a intercostal, in the second intercostal space, I put a needle, drained all thing, the pressures came back to 26. Then we finished on the right side. We ventilated the baby for 7 days, and the baby did well. The recent pictures also I have about this baby. Baby is doing fine. So thank you so much for your update. So thank you for patiently listening.
Thank you, Dr. Assam sir, for enlightening on the pediatric anesthesia. May I now request the chairpersons, Dr. Ganesh Prabhu and Dr. Kripagaran, to honor Dr. Assam. On uptake and distribution of inhalational anesthetics by Dr. Pankaj Kundra. Over to the chair.
Professor Pankaj Kundra, sir. So I am very much delighted to introduce him as a speaker. He is an excellent teacher. Actually, you will be realizing after his lecture that the topic he has chosen is a very complex topic. Uptake and distribution of inhalation anesthetic agent. Actually, it's a difficult topic in anesthesia. It's very difficult to understand. He will make you to understand very easily. So this is how the uptake of the inhalation anesthetic from the alveoli and how it reaches the brain, how it's being distributed, everything he will be highlighting. It's a very complex topic. Please concentrate on his lecture. Thank you.
Thank you very much, sir, for the kind introduction. And thank you, Dr. Edward, for giving me this opportunity. It's a pleasure to be here. Very unique way of introducing the first year PGs who have recently joined. You're very lucky, as the rest of the speakers have already mentioned. Now, you're going to become an anesthetist. So your prime goal is to provide proper anesthesia, right? That's why this topic is so important, that how do you give proper anesthesia to the patient, understanding how these agents are taken up, how do they produce anesthesia. So the process of anesthesia, or to produce a proper anesthetic depth, is dependent upon the minimal alveolar concentration which is required to produce a proper anesthetic depth. Now, how do we achieve this? When you deliver or you turn on the dial, you're going to send the gas into the alveoli, and because of alveolar ventilation, either when you're back ventilating or the patient is breathing spontaneously, those vapors from the vaporizer are going to reach the lung. So the molecules are in the vapor stage. Now when they have to go from a gas medium to a liquid medium, that is the blood, there has to be a coefficient. So that is what is called the blood gas partition coefficient. So it depends upon the solubility of the vapors, how much they dissolve into the blood. After that, because of the cardiac output, these molecules are circulated throughout the body, and the most important organ where they need to produce the anesthetic depth is the brain. So they have to transgress from liquid medium to a tissue, or let's say a solid medium. So again, there will be a partition coefficient on which these vapors will depend upon to act and to go across into that tissue. So that's called the liquid, or that's called the tissue blood partition coefficients. So these are the two coefficients you must keep it in mind, that from one phase of matter, the vapors are going into a different state of matter. Now we talked about MAC, and I told you that MAC is important as a guide for producing adequate depth of anesthesia. So what is MAC? MAC means that when you give a noxious stimulus to any patient, there should be an absence of a motor movement, that the patient doesn't move. And if it occurs in 50% of the patient, that is defined as a minimal alveolar concentration required to produce suppression of motor movement or purposeful movement to a noxious stimulus. So what does it tell us? It tells us two things. One is that the depth of anesthesia is to be maintained, and secondly, because you use many of inhalational agents like desflurane, like sevoflurane, like isoflurane, and they all require different MAC. So to determine or compare their potency, you need to know what is MAC. So when we say 1 MAC, it is a generalized nomenclature used for all inhalational anesthetic agents, because the concentration will differ, but MAC should be constant, right? That determines the potency and depth of anesthesia. Now, look at these graphs, if you see these graphs. So these are called MAC graphs, and there are three components which determine these concentration response curves. Now, what do you mean by concentration? The concentration of an anesthetic or an inhalational agent required to produce a particular response. And that response is the motor movement or a purposeful movement. How can you suppress that movement? What concentration would be required to suppress that movement in a patient so that the depth of anesthesia is maintained? So you have three parts. One is the potency, which is the x-axis. The other one is the slope. This is relatively a vertical line. It is not tilting towards the right. And the third one is the maximal efficacy. And what do we want to achieve? We want to achieve a maximal efficacy of immobility, right? On this side, we have the number of patients. So as I told you, it is in 50% of the patients that immobility should be achieved. At what concentration of that would determine the MAC. Now, look at these lines. These are relatively vertical lines. Vertical line means that there is hardly any change in the concentration to achieve this endpoint. That is, I'm not having any change in this concentration across all the patients, across all of us, to produce suppression of mobility with a particular concentration, which means they're almost straight line. There is hardly any deviation in the concentration. That means these concentrations are relatively constant across population. So if I say 1 MAC, I will be able to produce anesthesia properly in all patients across the population. So the percentage of variability is very less, which is only about 10 to 15% probability. So that's the beauty about inhalational agents. And that is why in your monitors, you look at the MAC value to say that you have properly anesthetized the patient. How is it uptaken? Now we come to the real topic. If I could understand this background, then now it will be easy for you to grasp what I'm going to tell you now. The uptake and equilibration is important. So first thing is, you will switch on the dial of a vaporizer. The vapors will be produced from the lungs with the help of alveolar ventilation. These vapors reach the alveoli. And the concentration which is achieved in the alveoli is termed as the fractional alveolar concentration, or FA. The concentration which you have set on the dial of the vaporizer is Fi, or the inspired concentration of the anesthetic vapor, right? Now comes the diffusion across the blood-gas partition. So the molecules now have to diffuse across from the alveoli into the blood. So that is where it is coming into the liquid phase. And with the help of cardiac output, it is now going to go into the brain, right? And there also we